Plutocracy, the real owners of power. The greatest theater in the world. Imagine you're in the greatest theater in the world. On stage, the actors, politicians, perform a play called Democracy. They fight, argue, promise, lie, and the audience, us, applauds or boos them according to the role they play. Some actors play the good guys, others the bad guys, some the saviors, others the villains. But while all your attention is focused on the spectacle on stage, you never look up toward the VIP boxes. There sit the real owners of the theater. They are the ones who wrote the script, they who finance the play, they who decide which actors go on stage and which don't. They are the ones who at the end of the day divide up the profits. Welcome to the real world. Welcome to plutocracy, the government of the rich, the power of those who have money. While you believe you live in a democracy where your vote counts, you're actually in a system where whoever has more money has more power. And that's not written in any constitution, but it's the most real rule that exists. What is plutocracy really? The word comes from Greek plutos, wealth, and kratos, power. It literally means government of the rich. But it's not like there's a sign that says millionaires rule here. It's much more subtle and much more effective than that. Modern plutocracy doesn't replace democracy, it uses it. It's like a parasite that lives inside the democratic system, feeding on it without destroying it, because it needs it to survive. On paper, you still have elections, parties, parliaments, constitutions. All the democratic apparatus works perfectly. But underneath, there's another power structure that runs on money. It's the perfect system because it's invisible to most people. You can vote, you can protest, you can change government every 4 or 5 years. But the really important decisions, the ones that affect your daily life, are made by people who never appear on an electoral ballot. The real centers of power. While you fight over whether candidate A or candidate B wins, there are meetings that never make the news where things are decided like which industries will grow, which countries will have economic crises, which technologies will be developed, which laws will actually be passed. These meetings don't happen in Congress or in the government palace. They happen in exclusive clubs, in international economic forums, in the offices of the world's largest banks, in the boardrooms of multinational corporations. That's where the people who really have power meet. Those who control money. Because in the end, in the modern world, money is power. Not the political power that's voted on every 4 years, but real power. The kind that decides whether there's work or not, whether prices go up or down, whether there's investment or disinvestment, whether a country prospers or sinks. How real control works. The genius of modern plutocracy is that it doesn't need to directly control politicians. It controls them indirectly, through the economic system. It's much more elegant and effective than old-fashioned corruption. You don't need to bribe the president to make him do what you want. You simply control the economic conditions in which the president has to govern. If the president does something you don't like, the markets react badly. Investments leave, the currency devalues, unemployment rises. And the president, pressured by the economic crisis, ends up doing exactly what you wanted from the beginning. It's like having a dog on an invisible leash. The dog thinks it's free, can run anywhere, but always within the radius the leash allows. And when it goes too far, it feels the pull and comes back. Politicians think they govern, but they actually administer. They administer decisions that others have already made elsewhere. They can discuss details, how to implement policies, but the general lines are already drawn by those who control money. The democracy of donors. Look at any modern electoral campaign. Candidates need millions to compete. Advertising, campaign teams, consultants, polls, events. Where does that money come from? From donors. And those donors don't give money for the love of art. They give it because they expect something in return. So you have a democracy where technically anyone can be a candidate, but in practice only those who get financing from those who already have economic power can compete. It's like a club where everyone can enter, but the entrance costs $1 million. And once the candidate reaches power with that money, who does he owe more loyalty to? To the voters who elected him for free, or to the donors who put up the money so he could get there? The answer is obvious, though it's never said explicitly. That's why campaign promises always get moderated once politicians reach power. It's not that they're liars, well, some are. It's that they discover there are prior commitments they have to fulfill before the promises they made to the people. The power of corporations. Today's multinational companies have more power than many countries. They have more money than the budget of entire nations, employ more people than the population of complete cities, and make decisions that affect millions of people worldwide. But unlike countries, corporations don't have to be accountable to any electorate. Their only bosses are shareholders, and their only objective is to maximize profits. They don't have to worry about education, public health, the environment, or social welfare, unless it affects their profits. When a corporation decides to close a factory and take it to another country, it can leave tens of thousands of people without work. When it decides to raise the prices of an essential product, it can worsen the quality of life of millions. When it decides not to invest in research for certain diseases, it can condemn to death people who could be saved. These decisions have more real impact on people's lives than most decisions made by elected politicians. But people don't vote for corporate CEOs. They can't remove them from power if they don't like what they do. The financial system as invisible government. If you want to understand who really governs the world, don't look at presidents, look at central banks and big investment banks. They control money, and whoever controls money controls everything else. When a central bank decides to raise or lower interest rates, it's deciding whether it will be easier or harder to get credit, whether people will be able to buy houses, whether companies will be able to invest, whether the economy will grow or enter recession. That decision affects people's daily lives more than most laws passed by parliaments. And those decisions are made by people who weren't elected by anyone, who don't have to be accountable to any voter. and who in many cases aren't even from the country whose economy they're controlling. Big investment banks decide where international capital flows go. If they decide a country is risky, investment leaves and crisis comes. If they decide it's attractive, money arrives and growth comes. Entire countries can prosper or sink according to decisions made by a dozen people in offices in London, New York, or Frankfurt. The globalization of plutocracy. What makes modern plutocracy so powerful is that it's global. Countries still have borders. Politicians still have limited jurisdictions, but money has no homeland. It can move from one country to another in seconds, can avoid laws from one place by going to another, can pit countries against each other to get better conditions. This capital mobility is what makes national governments so weak. A country can have the best intentions, the most honest politicians, the most just laws, but if money decides to leave, the country sinks. And to prevent money from leaving, countries end up competing with each other to see who offers better conditions to international capitals. It's a reverse auction, where whoever asks for less wins. Fewer taxes, fewer regulations, fewer labor rights, less environmental protection. Because if you don't do it, the neighboring country does, and there goes the investment. So you have the paradox that democratically elected governments end up making policies that no voter asked for, just to keep investors happy who nobody elected and who don't live in the country. The capture of institutions. Plutocracy doesn't need to destroy democratic institutions, it captures them. It's like a virus that infects immune system cells and uses them for its own purposes. Capture can be direct, putting your own people in key government positions, courts, regulatory agencies. Or it can be indirect, financing think tanks that produce ideas later adopted by politicians, financing universities that train future leaders, financing media outlets that define what is talked about and how it's talked about. It's not a conspiracy in the classic sense, because there's no secret meeting where everything is planned. It's more like a convergence of interests. People who have money tend to think similarly about what kind of policies suit them, and they use their money to promote those ideas. The result is that institutions that supposedly represent the people end up representing the interests of those who finance the system. And since this happens gradually, and since democratic forms are maintained, most people don't realize that the content changed even though the shell remains the same. The myth of meritocracy. One of plutocracy's most powerful tools is convincing people that the system is fair, that those who have more money have it because they deserve it, because they worked harder, because they're more intelligent, because they made better decisions. This meritocracy narrative is fundamental to maintaining the system's legitimacy. If people believe that economic power is just a matter of luck, inheritance, or system manipulation, it would be much harder to justify why some have so much power over others' lives. But the reality is that most of the world's great wealth is concentrated in a few families that have been accumulating it for generations. It's not that each generation demonstrates again that it deserves that wealth. It's that wealth perpetuates itself through inheritances, contacts, exclusive opportunities, and legal structures designed to preserve capital. The meritocracy myth also serves to divide those who don't have economic power. Instead of questioning why some have so much and others so little, people fight among themselves over who deserves more of the little that remains after the really rich took their share. Media as a control tool. Mass media are, to a large extent, owned by giant corporations or ultra-rich individuals. And although many journalists are honest and professional, media as institutions end up reflecting their owners' interests. It's not that there are explicit orders about what to say and what not to say, although sometimes there are. It's that there exists what's called self-censorship. Journalists and editors internalize what type of content is acceptable and what isn't, what lines can't be crossed, what topics can't be touched in certain ways. The result is that media talk a lot about politics, but very little about real economics. They talk about corruption scandals, but not about economic power structures. They talk about what politicians said what, but not about what corporation is doing what. They talk about the tree, but not about the forest. And when they talk about economics, it's generally from the perspective of financial markets, not from the perspective of ordinary people. Good economic news is that stocks went up, even though that doesn't mean life improved for anyone outside of investors. The education of consensus. The educational system also plays a key role in maintaining plutocracy. It's not that it teaches lies, it's that it teaches a version of reality that normalizes existing power structures. It teaches that democracy is government by the people, but doesn't teach how economic power really works. It teaches that the free market is efficient, but doesn't teach how real markets are manipulated by those who have more information and more resources. It teaches that individual success depends on personal effort, but doesn't teach how opportunities are distributed unequally from birth. It teaches individual competition, but not collective organization. The result is that most people leave the educational system believing the world works one way, when it actually works another way. And since this education comes from respectable institutions, it's very hard to question what they teach. The complexity trap. One of plutocracy's most effective mechanisms is making the economic system so complex that most people can't understand it. Financial instruments with incomprehensible names, labyrinthine corporate structures, thousands of pages of regulations that only specialists can interpret. This complexity isn't accidental, it's functional. The more complicated the system, the harder it is for ordinary people to understand who really has power and how they use it. And as long as you don't understand the system, you can't change it. It's like a game where the rules are written in a language only some players know. The others can participate, can even win some minor matches, but they'll never be able to change the rules of the game because they don't understand them. Complexity also allows real power to hide behind layers and layers of intermediaries. When something goes wrong, it's very hard to identify who is really responsible, because the decision chain is so long and complicated that there's always someone else to blame. The silent revolution. The most impressive thing about modern plutocracy is that it managed to fundamentally change how power works without most people realizing it. There were no revolutions, no coups, no constitution was changed. Simply, money kept concentrating more and more. And with that concentration came a concentration of power. It's a silent, gradual revolution that passes under the radar of visible politics. While people discuss social issues, identities, culture, real economic power keeps consolidating without making noise. It's brilliant as a strategy because it avoids organized resistance. If they had said we're going to concentrate all power in a few ultra-rich people, people would have rebelled. But since the process was gradual, and since democratic forms were maintained, most didn't perceive the change until it was too late. The limits of electoral democracy. Electoral democracy continues functioning, but within increasingly narrow limits. You can choose between candidates who, on really important issues, will make very similar policies because they're limited by the same economic restrictions. It's as if they let you choose the color of your house's curtains, but the house's structure was already decided by others. You have some freedom of choice, but only in aspects that don't affect important decisions. Politicians can differ on social, cultural issues, even on some minor economic policy aspects. But on issues that really affect the distribution of economic power, options are very limited. Because any candidate who seriously threatens those interests will find it very difficult to get financing, favorable media coverage, or institutional support. It's a system that allows dissidents in the margins, but not in the center. You can protest, you can vote, you can campaign, but always within a framework that doesn't question fundamental economic power structures. The future of plutocracy. New technologies are making plutocracy even more powerful. Artificial intelligence, big data, cryptocurrencies. All these technologies require enormous investments that only those who already have a lot of money can make. This means that the same people who control traditional economic power will also control future technologies. And these technologies will give them control tools they didn't even dream of before. The ability to predict behaviors, influence decisions, manipulate information on massive scales. There's also the possibility that automation will make much of the workforce unnecessary. If machines can do most jobs, machine owners will have all the power, and the rest of people will have to depend on their benevolence to survive. It's a scenario where democracy could become completely irrelevant, because important decisions will be made by algorithms programmed by corporations, not politicians elected by people. How to recognize plutocracy? If you want to know if you live in a plutocracy, don't look at laws, look at results. Who really benefits from implemented policies? Who has real access to decision makers? Who can change the rules of the game when they don't suit them? Notice who finances political campaigns, who owns media outlets, who's on central bank boards, who advises governments on economic issues. Notice if there's a revolving door between the private and public sectors, where the same people go back and forth between corporate positions and government positions. Look at whether economic crises always end up being paid for by ordinary people, while profits from good times concentrate among those who already had more. Look at whether policies that supposedly benefit everyone end up benefiting more those who need it least. And above all, look at whether you can imagine any real mechanism by which ordinary people can change the fundamental rules of the economic system through the existing political system. Possible resistance. Recognizing that you live in a plutocracy doesn't mean resigning yourself. It means understanding the real rules of the game to be able to play better. It means stopping fighting battles that don't matter and starting to fight the ones that do matter. It means understanding that changing governments isn't enough. You have to change structures. Voting every 4 or 5 years isn't enough. You have to organize permanently. Complaining about politicians isn't enough. You have to question the economic system that limits them. It means looking for ways to really democratize the economy. Cooperatives, social enterprises, public banks, independent media. Creating alternative economic structures that don't depend on concentrated capital. And it means above all education. Because plutocracy depends on most people not understanding how power really works. When enough people understand the game changes. The final question. In the end, the question isn't whether plutocracy exists or not. The question is whether you're willing to see it. Because once you start seeing real power structures, you can no longer believe in the simplified versions they sell you in media and schools. It's like Matrix. You can take the blue pill and keep believing you live in a real democracy where your vote counts the same as everyone's. Or you can take the red pill and see that you live in a system where money votes louder than people, where important decisions are made by people you didn't choose and can't remove from power. The red pill is uncomfortable because it forces you to rethink everything you believed about how the world works. But it's also liberating because only when you understand the real rules of the game can you start to change it. The choice is yours. But remember, ignorance was never really a blessing. It was just a more subtle form of slavery.